Hey everyone, welcome back to another Sleepover with History. I'm Thomas, and I'll be your guide through tonight's journey into one of humanity's darkest chapters. You think your Monday morning is rough? Try crawling through barbed wire, while artillery shells rain down like deadly meteors, knowing your life expectancy just dropped to 6 weeks the moment you stepped into no man's land. From receiving that fateful conscription letter to your final moments in a muddy crater somewhere in France, this is how an entire generation learned that glory was a lie, honor was a luxury, and survival was just getting lucky one more day. Before we dive in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you genuinely enjoy these late-night historical deep dives. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. It's always fascinating to see our global community gathering for these adventures. Now get comfortable, dim those lights and settle in, because tonight we're exploring the absolutely horrifying fate of a soldier in the trenches of World War I. The letter that changed everything, it arrives on a Tuesday morning in 1916, mixed in with the usual mail like a wolf hiding among sheep. Your mother brings it to the breakfast table with shaking hands, and you already know what it is before you break the wax seal. The envelope is too official, too clean, too final. His Majesty requires your service, it begins, as if the king personally sat down and wrote you a friendly invitation to hell. But this isn't a request, it's a summons. You've been conscripted, drafted, volunteered against your will for the greatest show on earth. And by greatest, I mean most horrifically deadly. You're probably 18, maybe 19. Yesterday, your biggest worry was whether Mary from the village would dance with you at the harvest festival. Today, you're staring at a piece of paper that's essentially your death warrant, wrapped in patriotic language about duty and honor. Your father nods grimly. He remembers stories from his father about previous wars, but nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared anyone for what's waiting in France. This isn't the cavalry charges and gentlemen's battles of bygone eras. This is industrial-scale slaughter dressed up as warfare. The propaganda posters make it look glorious. Clean uniforms, noble poses, enemies falling dramatically while you stand triumphant with a perfectly pressed tunic. What they don't show you is the rats, or the dysentery, or the way a human body comes apart when it meets a high-explosive shell at close range. But right now, you don't know any of that. Right now, you're just a young man whose life just got completely upended by bureaucracy and bad European politics. You have 2 weeks to report for duty, 2 weeks to say goodbye to everything you've ever known. Your mother starts crying before you even finish reading the letter aloud. She knows somehow, what you don't know yet, that the boy having breakfast with her this morning might not be coming home. The statistics are already terrible by 1916. And they're about to get worse. You spend those 2 weeks in a strange limbo. Everything feels both urgent and pointless. Should you help your father with the farm? Should you write letters to people? Should you try to kiss Mary behind the church after Sunday service? None of it seems to matter when you're about to be fed into the great machine of the Western Front. Welcome to boot camp, where they take soft civilian boys and attempt to forge them into killing machines in roughly 8 weeks. Spoiler alert. 8 weeks isn't nearly enough time, but nobody asked the generals if their timeline was realistic. You arrive at the training camp with a dozen other boys from neighboring villages, all clutching the same official letter, all wearing the same expression of confused terror. You're immediately stripped of everything that made you an individual, your clothes, your hair, your name, and issued a number, a uniform that doesn't fit, and a rifle that's older than your grandfather. The drill sergeant is a man who seems to have been carved from granite and bad decisions. He's been broken by previous battles and put back together with anger and cheap whiskey. His job is to break you down completely and build you back up as something that won't run away when the shooting starts. This process begins immediately and ends never. You're not farmers anymore. He screams inches from your face, spraying spittle and the scent of last night's gin. You're not sons or sweethearts or anything else. You're meat for the grinder, and my job is to make sure you're the right consistency. This is your introduction to military philosophy, which can be summarized as individual human life has no value, but group obedience is sacred. You'll spend the next several weeks learning to move as one unit, think as one mind, and die as one statistic. The training is designed to be deliberately brutal. They wake you at 4 a.m. with shouting and banging pots. You march until your feet bleed, then march some more. You crawl through mud under barbed wire, while instructors fire live ammunition over your head, just high enough that you probably won't die, but low enough that you might. You learn to assemble and disassemble your rifle blindfolded, in the rain, while someone screams at you about Kaiser Wilhelm. You practice bayonet charges against straw dummies that represent German soldiers, stabbing and screaming until the straw resembles confetti and your throat is raw. They teach you to throw grenades, which sounds exciting until you realize grenades are basically handheld bombs with the social skills of a rabid badger. Get the timing wrong, and you're not a soldier anymore. You're a cautionary tale, and a cleaning problem. The worst part isn't the physical training, it's the psychological conditioning. They show you propaganda films of German atrocities, some real, some exaggerated, all designed to make you hate people you've never met. They tell you stories of German soldiers bayoneting babies, and using churches for target practice. Whether these stories are true becomes irrelevant. What matters is that you start seeing the enemy as less than human. Meanwhile, they're also preparing you for your own death, though they don't put it quite so bluntly. You learn to write farewell letters to your family. You're instructed on how to make a will despite owning nothing but a pocket watch and 3 shillings. You're taught to identify different types of wounds so you can help wounded comrades, or recognize when someone is beyond help. They don't tell you that most wounds in this war aren't the clean bullet holes from adventure stories. They're the kind of injuries that require you to gather up pieces of your friend, and hope you got most of him. They don't mention that the leading cause of death won't be enemy bullets. It'll be disease, infection, and the slow psychological breakdown that comes from living in hell. The food during training is terrible, but it's gourmet dining compared to what's waiting in the trenches. You eat watery soup, bread that could double as a weapon, and meat of questionable origin. The cooks seem to have learned their trade from studying methods of torture. This is actually preparation, though nobody tells you that. They're getting your digestive system ready for a diet of hardtack canned beef, and whatever you can scavenge from dead enemies. After 8 weeks you can march in formation, shoot relatively straight, and follow orders without thinking. You can't actually survive trench warfare, that requires skills they don't teach in boot camp, like how to sleep standing up in mud, how to tell the difference between incoming and outgoing artillery by sound, or how to keep your sanity when your best friend's face disappears in a cloud of red mist. But the army has decided you're ready. They give you a rifle, a helmet that won't stop anything more dangerous than harsh language, and orders to report to the Western Front. Congratulations, you're now officially cannon fodder with a number and a heartbeat. The train ride to France starts almost festively. Towns along the route have turned out to wave flags and throw flowers. Pretty girls blow kisses from station platforms. Old men who fought in previous wars salute with grim pride. Brass bands play patriotic songs that would be stirring if you didn't know where this train is ultimately headed. You're crammed into cattle cars with 40 other soldiers, all of you still young enough to find this exciting rather than terrifying. Someone starts singing, others join in. For a brief shining moment, it feels like the adventure the recruitment posters promised. You're young, you're brave, and you're off to serve your country and come home covered in glory. The singing stops somewhere around Dover. The Channel crossing is rough, and half the regiment spends it hanging over the rail, feeding the fish with their breakfast. This is your first lesson in how your body will betray you repeatedly over the coming months. You thought you were tough after basic training. The English Channel has other opinions. The French countryside looks peaceful from the train window as you roll southeast toward the front lines. Farmhouses, churches, rolling fields. It could be a postcard if you ignore the occasional burned village, or the refugee families walking alongside the tracks with everything they own strapped to their backs. But as you get closer to the front, the landscape starts to change. Trees become more scarred, buildings show shell damage, the air begins to smell wrong. Not like countryside anymore, but like something burning, something rotting, something fundamentally broken. You start to hear it before you can see it. A low, constant rumble like thunder that never ends. That's the artillery, the guns that never sleep, the mechanical heartbeat of the Western Front. It's still miles away, but you can feel it in your chest, a bass note that seems to vibrate your bones. The final leg of the journey is on foot. You march through increasingly devastated countryside, as that rumbling grows louder and the smell gets worse. The trees here don't have leaves anymore. They're just blackened sticks pointing accusingly at the sky. The roads are churned mud, mixed with things you don't want to identify. You pass hospitals, actual buildings at first, then field hospitals under canvas, then just areas where wounded men lie on stretchers waiting for transport that may or may not come. This is your first real glimpse of what you're walking into. These aren't the clean, dramatic wounds from adventure stories. These are missing limbs, missing faces, missing sanity. The walking wounded shuffle past you in the opposite direction. They don't make eye contact. They don't respond to your nervous jokes or attempts at camaraderie. They've seen what's ahead, and they know what you don't know yet, that you're not marching toward glory. You're marching toward a meat grinder that's been running for 2 years and shows no signs of slowing down. Your new rifle feels heavier with each mile. Your pack, which seemed manageable during training, now cuts into your shoulders like it's filled with stones. Your boots, perfectly adequate for marching around England, are already falling apart in the French mud that seems designed specifically to destroy footwear and morale simultaneously. Officers on horseback ride up and down the column, shouting encouragement that sounds increasingly hollow. "Almost there, lads," they call out, as if you're heading to a cricket match instead of industrial-scale slaughter. Show Jerry what British steel can do. They'll be safely behind the lines within hours, planning your deaths from comfortable headquarters with actual walls and floors. The closer you get, the more the landscape resembles the surface of an alien planet. Shell craters filled with stagnant water, coils of barbed wire stretching in every direction like mechanical thorns, and always, that smell getting stronger, cordite and decay, and something sweetly nauseating that you'll eventually learn is the smell of death on an industrial scale. You're almost there now. The rumbling is no longer distant thunder, it's immediate, constant bone-shaking artillery fire. The earth beneath your feet trembles with each explosion. The air shimmers with smoke and dust and things you can't identify. Welcome to the Western Front, where the flower of European youth has come to die in the mud for reasons that made sense to someone, somewhere, but certainly don't make sense to you as you stumble toward your first glimpse of the trenches. Your first view of the trench system comes at night, which is both a blessing and a curse. A blessing because you can't see all the details immediately. A curse because what you can see in the flickering light of flares and artillery bursts looks like something from a nightmare. The trenches aren't the neat, organized lines you saw in training diagrams. They're a sprawling maze of mud, wooden planks, sandbags, and desperation. They zigzag across the landscape like a drunk person's attempt at drawing a straight line, designed to prevent enemy fire from enfilading an entire section when they break through, and they will break through. It's not a matter of if, but when. You're assigned to a section of trench that the previous occupants have optimistically named Piccadilly Circus. Apparently, British soldiers maintain their sense of irony even when living in holes in the ground. The veteran soldiers who meet you have been here for months. You can tell because they move differently, speak in whispers, and have that 1,000-yard stare that says they've seen things that can't be unseen. "Fresh meat," one of them mutters, not unkindly, as you stumble down into the trench system with your pristine equipment and unmarked uniform. "Try not to stick your head up, Tommy. Jerry's got snipers, and they're very good at their job." The trenches are roughly 8 feet deep and 4 feet wide, just enough room for one person to move past another if they turn sideways, and neither of them is carrying much equipment. The walls are lined with sandbags, wooden planks, and whatever else the engineers could scrounge up. It's not comfortable, but it's not supposed to be. It's supposed to keep you alive long enough to kill other people. The floor of the trench is covered in wooden duckboards, planks laid down to keep you from sinking into the mud. But the mud has opinions about this arrangement, and frequently wins. Your feet are going to be wet for the next several months, assuming you keep them attached to your legs for that long. Above your head, strung between wooden posts, is a maze of camouflage netting, corrugated iron sheets and more sandbags. This is supposed to protect you from observation and incoming artillery. It works about as well as an umbrella in a hurricane, but it makes everyone feel slightly better about their chances of seeing tomorrow. Your first night in the trenches is sleepless, not because of enemy action, but because of the sounds. Constant sounds. The war never stops, never rests, never even pauses for breath. Artillery rumbles in the distance. Rifles crack somewhere in the darkness. Machine guns chatter like deadly typewriters. Flares hiss as they climb into the sky, casting everything in harsh, flickering shadows. And underneath all the mechanical sounds of warfare, you hear something worse. The sounds of wounded men calling for help from no man's land. The space between the trenches where rescue is impossible, and death comes slowly. These voices will haunt your dreams for the rest of your life, however long that might be. You're assigned a spot in the fire trench, the front line, where you'll spend your days staring across no man's land at German trenches roughly 100 yards away, sometimes closer, sometimes so close you can hear them talking, coughing, crying for their mothers in a language you don't understand, but somehow recognize as the same fear you feel. The fire step is a wooden platform that lets you see over the parapet, the front wall of the trench. This is where you'll spend most of your time, rifle ready, watching for any sign of enemy movement. It's also where you're most likely to die, because German snipers spend their days watching for careless British heads popping up over the sandbags. Your section of trench comes with all the modern conveniences. A small dugout carved into the trench wall, where you can huddle during bombardments. A periscope made from mirrors and prayer, that lets you observe the enemy without exposing your head. And a small supply of ammunition that you're expected to make last until the next supply run. If there is a next supply run. The veteran soldiers give you the basic rules for staying alive, delivered with the casual tone of men discussing the weather. Don't look over the parapet during daylight, unless you want a German bullet for breakfast. Don't light cigarettes at night. Snipers use the flame as target practice. Don't drink water from shell craters. It's usually mixed with interesting chemicals and pieces of your predecessors. Don't trust anything that looks safe. Jerry's fond of booby traps. Don't get attached to anyone. Chances are they'll be dead within a month. These aren't military regulations. These are survival tips passed down from man to man like some grim oral tradition. The difference between military training and trench reality is the difference between reading about swimming and being thrown into a shark tank. Your first dawn in the trenches brings stand to, the morning ritual where every man takes his position on the fire step, rifle loaded, bayonet fixed, waiting for an attack that might or might not come. It's the most dangerous time of day, because dawn and dusk are when attacks usually happen, when the light makes movement possible, but accuracy difficult. You stand there in the growing light, staring across no man's land at the German trenches, and realize that somewhere over there, a German soldier your own age is staring back at you, probably just as scared, just as far from home, just as certain that he's fighting for the right cause. This is the moment you truly understand what you've gotten yourself into. This isn't glorious warfare between armies. This is a standoff between two groups of terrified young men with rifles, all waiting to see who kills who first. Welcome to trench warfare, where the definition of victory is not dying today, and tomorrow isn't guaranteed to anyone, regardless of which uniform they're wearing or which flag they salute. Dawn stand to ends. And if you're lucky enough to have survived another night and another German attack hasn't materialized, you begin the daily routine that will either keep you sane or drive you completely mad. There's no middle ground in the trenches. Breakfast is a generous term for what you're about to consume. The army calls it rations, but you'll quickly learn that military terminology has a flexible relationship with reality. Your morning meal consists of hardtack biscuits that could double as building materials, canned beef that bears only a passing resemblance to anything that once had 4 legs and a heartbeat, and tea that tastes like it was made from water scraped out of a shell crater, which it probably was. The hardtack requires special techniques to consume. First, you soak it in whatever liquid is available, tea, water, or if you're particularly desperate, your own saliva. Then you gnaw on it like a beaver, attacking a particularly stubborn tree. If you're lucky, it only breaks one tooth. If you're unlucky, you discover the little moving specks aren't seasoning, they're weevils, and they've been living in your breakfast longer than you've been in France. The canned beef, officially known as bully beef, has achieved legendary status among British forces. Not good legendary. More like this substance has been banned in several civilized countries. Legendary. It's salty enough to cure leather, tough enough to repair equipment, and flavored with what can only be described as industrial despair. But you eat it anyway, because starving to death, is even less appealing than consuming mystery meat from a can that's older than your little sister. Water is a constant concern, not having enough of it, not having clean sources of it, and not accidentally drinking water that's been contaminated with poison gas, corpses, or other substances that turn your digestive system into a biological weapon. Every drop has to be purified with tablets that make it taste like liquid chlorine, but liquid chlorine is preferable to dysentery, which kills more soldiers than German bullets. After breakfast comes weapons maintenance. Your rifle is your lifeline, and if it jams during a firefight, you become a very easy target with no way to shoot back. So you clean it obsessively, even though the mud and moisture of the trenches ensure it will be dirty again within hours. The Lee Enfield rifle is actually a decent weapon, reliable, accurate, and capable of rapid fire in trained hands. The problem isn't the rifle, the problem is keeping any mechanical device functional in an environment that seems specifically designed to destroy machinery, morale, and human beings with equal efficiency. You clean the barrel, oil the bolt, check the magazine, and inspect every component for signs of rust, damage, or malfunction. Your life depends on this rifle working when you need it, so you treat it better than you treat yourself. Which isn't difficult, considering how badly you're treating yourself these days. Next comes trench maintenance, which sounds like light housework but is actually back-breaking labor that would make medieval serfs complain about working conditions. The trenches are in constant need of repair, because artillery, weather, and the fundamental laws of physics are all conspiring to fill them with mud, collapse their walls, and generally make them uninhabitable. You shovel mud, then you shovel more mud, then you discover that the mud you just shoveled has been replaced by different mud that needs to be shoveled. It's like a twisted version of the myth of Sisyphus, except instead of a boulder, you're dealing with French soil that has achieved consciousness and decided to make your life miserable. The duck boards, those wooden planks that serve as flooring, need constant replacement. They rot, they break, they sink into the mud, or they get blown to splinters by shell fragments. Without them, the trench floor becomes a swamp that can swallow a man up to his waist. With them you have a slightly elevated swamp that only swallows you up to your knees. Sandbags need replacing too. They wear out, get shot full of holes, or simply dissolve in the constant moisture. Each sandbag weighs about 60 pounds when full, and moving them around in the confined space of a trench while wearing full equipment is like playing a deadly game of Tetris where the pieces are trying to kill you. The worst part of trench maintenance is dealing with drainage. Water collects everywhere, in shell craters, in the bottom of trenches, in dugouts, in your boots, in your soul. The army has provided pumps for removing water, but the pumps break down regularly, usually at the exact moment when you need them most. When the pumps fail, you bail water by hand using whatever containers you can find. Helmets, mess tins, empty ammunition boxes, and if you're really desperate, your own cupped hands. It's exhausting, futile work because the water comes back faster than you can remove it, but the alternative is drowning in your own defensive position. Between maintenance tasks, you perform sentry duty, which involves staring across no man's land through periscopes or through carefully concealed gaps in the parapet, watching for any sign of enemy activity. This sounds simple, until you realize that any sign of enemy activity could include snipers trying to shoot you, patrols trying to infiltrate your lines, or preparations for a major attack that could overrun your position. Most of the time, nothing happens. You stare at empty landscape, abandoned equipment, and the occasional corpse that nobody has been able to retrieve. This sounds boring, but boredom in a war zone is a luxury. Boredom means nobody is trying to kill you at this particular moment. The problem with sentry duty is that you have to stay alert during these long periods of nothing happening, because the moment you relax, something will happen, and that something will probably involve bullets flying in your direction at high velocity. So you develop the 1,000-yard stare, that blank expression that says your body is present, but your mind has retreated to somewhere safer. It's a defense mechanism that keeps you functional, but it's also the first sign that the war is changing you in ways that can't be undone. Somewhere between the routine maintenance and the constant vigilance, you begin to understand that this isn't temporary. This isn't a brief military campaign that will end with a glorious victory parade. This is your life now. Mud, fear, routine, and the ever-present possibility of sudden violent death. and you haven't even been here a week yet. If you thought the worst part of trench warfare would be the mud or the cold or the terrible food, you were wrong. The worst part is the noise, the constant never-ending, sanity-shredding noise that follows you into your dreams and makes silence seem like a half-remembered luxury from a previous life. The war never sleeps, even during the quietest moments, when no major offensive is happening, and both sides have settled into their daily routines of mutual hatred. There's always sound. Always something mechanical screaming, exploding, rattling, or grinding in the distance. Artillery is the baseline of this deadly symphony. The big guns boom constantly from positions miles behind the lines, sending shells arcing overhead, like deadly meteors. You learn to identify different types of artillery by sound because your life depends on knowing what's heading your way. The light field guns make a sharp crack when they fire, followed by a whistling sound as the shell flies overhead, then a sharp explosion on impact. These shells are designed to kill people, and they're very good at their job. If you hear the whistle getting louder and higher in pitch, it's coming your way. Time to find the deepest hole you can, and pray to whatever gods look after terrified young men with rifles. The heavy artillery sounds different, a deeper boom when fired, a longer, more ominous whistle in flight, and an explosion that shakes the earth for miles around. Heavy shells aren't just trying to kill you personally, they're trying to reshape the landscape, collapse trenches, and generally convince everyone in the area that continuing to exist is a poor life choice. Then there are the mortars, which don't whistle at all. They make a distinctive plop sound when fired, followed by complete silence, then sudden death dropping out of the sky, with no warning. Mortars are designed specifically for trench warfare, high-angle fire, that drops shells directly into narrow trenches where traditional artillery can't reach. Machine guns provide the percussion section. The Vickers guns chatter constantly, laying down suppressing fire to keep enemy heads down. Each gun fires about 500 rounds per minute, which sounds like a deadly typewriter, operated by someone having a very productive day at the office of death. You can tell the difference between your machine guns and theirs by sound. British Vickers guns have a steady, methodical chatter. German Maxim guns sound faster, more frantic. When you hear the German guns start up, everyone in your section of trench suddenly develops a strong interest in making themselves as small as possible. Rifle fire is the melody line. Individual shots ringing out as snipers take careful aim or nervous sentries fire at shadows. Each shot represents someone trying to kill someone else, and in the confined space of opposing trench lines, most shots are aimed at specific targets rather than random harassment. When you hear a rifle shot, you automatically duck, even if the shot wasn't aimed at you. It's a reflex that develops quickly and never goes away. Every sharp crack might be the last sound you hear, so you treat them all with equal respect and terror. But it's not just the weapons that make noise. The trenches themselves are constantly producing their own soundtrack of misery. Wooden planks creak under the weight of sandbags. Metal equipment rattles against trench walls. Water drips constantly from makeshift roofs and pooled in every available container. Men cough from gas exposure, lung infections, and the general unhealthiness of living in a hole in the ground. They mutter prayers, curses, and letters to girlfriends they'll probably never see again. They grind their teeth in their sleep and wake up screaming from nightmares that are barely worse than their waking reality. The rats add their own contribution to the noise. Rats the size of small cats, grown fat on battlefield carrion, scurry through the trenches at night, their claws scratching on wood, their squeaking almost human in the darkness. You learn to sleep through the sound of rats running across your body, because there are too many of them to kill, and they're probably cleaner than most of the things you're forced to eat. Aircraft contribute occasional sound effects, the drone of engines as reconnaissance planes photograph your positions, the stuttering sound of aerial machine guns during dogfights, and the distinctive whistle of bombs dropped from the early bombers that are just beginning to appear over the battlefield. Gas attacks bring their own terrifying sounds. First the distinctive pop of gas canisters being opened in the German trenches, then the hiss of poison chlorine, or phosgene drifting across no man's land on the wind, then the frantic sound of gas alarm bells, followed by the muffled breathing of men trying to survive in primitive gas masks that may or may not work. During a gas attack, The only sound louder than your own terrified breathing inside a gas mask is the sound of men who didn't get their masks on fast enough, choking and gasping as their lungs dissolve from the inside out. The worst sounds come from no man's land itself, the space between the trenches where wounded men lie calling for help that can't come until nightfall, if at all. These voices cry out in English, German, French, and languages you can't identify, all saying the same thing in different words. Please help me, please don't let me die alone, please make the pain stop. You learn to ignore these voices because there's nothing you can do during daylight hours without getting shot by snipers. But ignoring them doesn't make them stop, and they follow you into your dreams where they mix with all the other sounds of war to create a symphony of trauma that will echo in your head for the rest of your life. This is the soundtrack of the Western Front, a constant audio reminder that you're living in the loudest, most violent place human beings have ever created. And after a few weeks, you realize something truly disturbing. You're getting used to it. The sounds that would have terrified you into paralysis a month ago now barely register. That's when you know the war is changing you in ways that go deeper than uniforms and regulations. When the sound of high explosive death becomes background noise, you've crossed a line that can never be uncrossed. 100 yards away, close enough to hear them cough on quiet nights, close enough to smell their cooking when the wind is right, close enough to see individual faces through periscopes during daylight hours, are the Germans, the enemy, the Hun, the people you've been trained to hate and kill without question or hesitation. Except they look remarkably like you. Through your periscope, you can see German soldiers going about their daily routines in trenches that look almost identical to yours. They're maintaining their weapons, repairing their positions, eating terrible food, and trying not to get shot by British snipers. They wear different uniforms and serve a different flag, but they're young men far from home, scared, cold, wet, and probably wondering how they ended up in a hole in the ground in France. This creates a psychological problem that military training never prepared you for. It's easy to hate an abstract enemy described in propaganda pages. It's much harder to hate specific individuals whose humanity keeps intruding on your carefully cultivated bloodlust. You watch a German soldier through your periscope as he reads a letter from home. His face shows the same mixture of joy and sadness that you feel when you read letters from your own family. He's probably reading about his mother's cooking, his girlfriend's latest news, or his little brother's progress in school. The same things you read about in your own letters. Another German sits on a fire step cleaning his rifle with the same obsessive care you give to your own weapon. His movements are practiced, efficient, professional. He knows that rifle might be the only thing standing between him and death, just like you know about yours. He's performing the same ritual of survival that occupies so much of your own time. Sometimes, when the artillery quiets down and the machine guns take a break, you can hear them talking. German voices carrying across no man's land, discussing the same topics that occupy British conversation: the weather, the food, letters from home, speculation about when this war might end, and everyone can go back to their real lives. Occasionally you hear German laughter. This is the most unsettling sound of all, because it sounds exactly like British laughter. Men sharing jokes, probably complaining about their officers, maybe telling stories about girlfriends or making fun of each other's bad habits. The sound of human beings finding moments of joy, even in the middle of industrialized hell. The propaganda tells you that Germans are different from you, more brutal, less civilized, inherently evil. But the evidence of your own eyes and ears suggests that they're just people caught up in the same insane situation, following orders from leaders who are safely behind the lines, fighting for countries and causes that probably matter less than the simple desire to survive another day. This doesn't stop you from trying to kill them, of course. It just makes the killing more complicated. When a German head appears over their parapet, you take careful aim and squeeze the trigger, the same way you were trained to do in England. If you hit him, he falls backward and disappears, and you never know whether you killed him, wounded him, or just convinced him to keep his head down for a while. But sometimes, through your periscope, you see the aftermath. A German stretcher team retrieving a wounded man, or the distinctive shape of a body being carried to whatever serves as their burial ground. And you realize that the target you shot at had a name, a family, a life beyond this muddy battlefield. The Germans are equally committed to killing you, of course. Their snipers are extremely skilled, and take pride in picking off careless British soldiers. Their artillery regularly drops shells on your trenches with lethal accuracy. Their machine gunners sweep no man's land with methodical precision, ensuring that anyone foolish enough to show themselves during daylight hours will be cut down immediately. But even their attempts to kill you have a professional quality that suggests competence rather than evil. They're not trying to kill you because they hate you personally. They're trying to kill you because that's their job, the same way killing them is your job. Night raids complicate this psychological dynamic even further. Small groups from both sides regularly cross no man's land under cover of darkness to gather intelligence, capture prisoners, or simply remind the enemy that they're not safe even in their own trenches. When you encounter German soldiers during these raids, the abstract enemy becomes very personal very quickly. You see their faces up close, smell their fear, hear them whisper prayers in German as they try to avoid detection. Sometimes you kill them with bayonets or entrenching tools, close enough to look into their eyes as they die. These intimate encounters with death are harder to process than long-range shooting. When you kill a man with your hands, you can't pretend he wasn't a real person with hopes and fears and people who loved him. You killed someone's son, someone's brother, someone's sweetheart, and that knowledge follows you back to your own trench where you sit in the mud and try not to think about what you've just done. The strangest moments come during unofficial truces, brief periods when both sides seem to agree, without any formal communication, that they're too exhausted to keep killing each other for a few hours. During these lulls, you might hear German voices singing songs that sound hauntingly similar to British folk songs, just in a different language. Sometimes, soldiers from both sides emerge from their trenches simultaneously to collect wounded from no man's land, and for a few minutes, British and German soldiers work side by side, helping their respective wounded without any hostility. These moments of shared humanity make the return to organized slaughter even more surreal. You begin to understand that the real enemy isn't the German soldiers in the trenches across from you. The real enemy is the war itself, this massive impersonal machine that has taken millions of young men from across Europe and set them to killing each other for reasons that seem increasingly abstract and meaningless. But understanding this doesn't change your situation. Tomorrow morning you'll still take your position on the fire step, rifle loaded, ready to kill those same German soldiers who laugh and sing and miss their families just like you do. Because in trench warfare, philosophical understanding is a luxury that gets people killed. Your job isn't to understand the enemy's humanity, it's to end it. If you think the Germans are your biggest threat, you're wrong. Your most dangerous enemies don't wear uniforms, carry rifles, or follow the rules of warfare. They're invisible, omnipresent, and absolutely relentless in their pursuit of British soldiers who thought they'd only have to worry about bullets and bombs. Welcome to the disease ward that is trench warfare, where more men die from infection, illness, and the general breakdown of human biology than from all the German weapons combined. Trench foot is your first introduction to how your own body can become your enemy. Your feet have been wet for weeks now, soaked in a combination of rainwater, mud, and liquids you prefer not to identify. The constant moisture, combined with the cold and the inability to change socks regularly, creates perfect conditions for tissue death. First, your feet go numb. This seems like a blessing at first, because numbness is better than the constant aching cold you've been experiencing. But then the numbness spreads, and your feet start turning colors that feet shouldn't turn, pale white, then alarming red, then a blackish color that indicates your extremities have decided to give up on the whole being alive concept. The smell comes next. Your feet begin to rot while still attached to your legs, producing an odor so distinctive that experienced soldiers can diagnose trench foot from across a trench. It's sweet, cloying, and nauseating, the smell of living tissue giving up and joining the general decay that permeates everything at the front. If caught early, trench foot can be treated by drying the feet, changing socks, and keeping them elevated. If caught late, treatment involves amputation and hoping the infection doesn't spread far enough to kill you outright. Many soldiers end up losing toes, feet, or entire legs to an enemy they never saw coming. Lice are your constant companions, tiny passengers who've decided that your body heat and blood supply make you an ideal host. They live in your clothing, your hair, and every fold and crevice of your unwashed body. They bite constantly, creating itching so severe that men scratch themselves raw, which creates open wounds that then become infected with whatever bacteria happen to be floating around the trenches. The itching never stops. You scratch during the day, you scratch at night, you wake up scratching. Your fingernails are permanently stained with blood from scratching infected lice bites. You develop a constant fidgeting behavior as you try to relieve itching in places you can't reach while maintaining the appearance of military discipline. Lice also carry diseases, typhus, trench fever, and other infections that can kill you just as effectively as German bullets, but much more slowly and with considerably more suffering. The medical corps issues dosing powder, but it's about as effective as trying to stop rain with a paper umbrella. Dysentery turns your digestive system into a biological weapon aimed at your own body. The combination of contaminated water, spoiled food, and generally unsanitary conditions creates perfect breeding grounds for bacteria that attack your intestines with enthusiasm and efficiency. The symptoms start with stomach cramps that feel like someone is twisting your internal organs into knots. Then comes the diarrhea, violent, bloody, and impossible to control. In the confined space of a trench, where privacy doesn't exist, and bathroom facilities consist of buckets or designated areas that are regularly shelled by artillery, dysentery becomes a public humiliation as well as a medical emergency. Men with severe dysentery become dehydrated and weak within days. They can't keep food down, can't maintain their positions, and can't perform basic military duties. But they also can't be easily evacuated, because dysentery isn't considered a serious enough injury to warrant removal from the front lines. You're expected to continue fighting while your body tries to turn itself inside out. Respiratory diseases thrive in the damp, crowded conditions of trench life. Pneumonia, bronchitis, and tuberculosis spread rapidly through units where men sleep shoulder to shoulder in underground dugouts with no ventilation. The air is thick with moisture, smoke from cooking fires, and whatever chemical residue is drifting over from the latest gas attack. You develop a persistent cough that produces blood-flecked sputum. Your chest feels like it's filled with broken glass every time you breathe. Fever makes you delirious, but there's nowhere to rest, and no one to care for you except fellow soldiers who are dealing with their own medical emergencies. The cough gets worse at night, when the dampness settles into your lungs and makes every breath a struggle. You lie on your narrow bunk, listening to a dozen other men coughing in the darkness, and realize that you're all slowly drowning in your own bodily fluids, while waiting for German bullets to put you out of your misery. Infected wounds are a constant concern in an environment where cleanliness is impossible, and medical care is limited. Every cut, scrape or bullet wound becomes a potential death sentence if infection sets in. An infection almost always sets in, because everything in the trenches is contaminated with bacteria, chemical residue, and decaying organic matter. A simple cut from barbed wire can become a festering wound that refuses to heal. Shell fragments carry dirt and debris deep into tissue, creating infections that spread faster than they can be treated. Even minor injuries become major problems when you can't keep them clean, can't change dressings regularly, and can't rest long enough for healing to occur. Gangrene is the final stage of many infected wounds, tissue death that spreads through your body like a slow-motion explosion. The affected area turns black, begins to smell like rotting meat, and has to be amputated quickly before the infection reaches vital organs. Many soldiers end up losing limbs to infections that would have been easily treatable in civilian hospitals with proper facilities and time. The psychological toll of watching your own body break down is almost as devastating as the physical effects. You enlisted as a healthy young man, confident in your strength and vitality. Now you're a walking collection of diseases, infections, and slowly failing biological systems. You realize that even if you survive the war, even if you avoid bullets and bombs and gas attacks, you may never fully recover from what this environment has done to your body. The diseases you're carrying now will follow you home, affecting your health for the rest of your life, however long that might be. This is biological warfare on a scale that no military strategist ever planned for, entire armies being slowly consumed not by enemy action, but by the simple impossibility of keeping human bodies healthy under these conditions. And the worst part is that everybody knows it. The officers know their men are dying of disease faster than they're being killed in combat, but the strategic situation doesn't allow for the kind of rest and medical care that would actually solve the problem. The medical corps knows they're fighting a losing battle against infections they can't properly treat with the resources available. Even the men know they're being killed by their own living conditions as much as by German weapons. But knowing doesn't change anything. Tomorrow you'll still wake up in the same muddy hole, still breathe the same contaminated air, still eat the same spoiled food, and still watch your body break down one infection at a time. Because in trench warfare your own biology has become just another enemy trying to kill you, and it's working around the clock with German efficiency. After 2 months in the trenches, you begin to notice changes in yourself that have nothing to do with physical injuries or disease. Your mind, that dependable organ that got you through school, courtship, and civilian life, has started behaving in ways that would have alarmed you if you were still capable of being alarmed by anything. You don't sleep anymore, not real sleep, anyway. You enter a kind of suspended consciousness, where part of your brain stays alert for incoming artillery, while another part tries to rest. Your body lies on the wooden planks that serve as a bed, but your mind never fully disengages from the constant state of mortal terror that has become your new normal. When you do manage something resembling sleep, the dreams come. Not the pleasant dreams of home and family that sustained you during your first weeks here, but twisted nightmares, where the faces of dead Germans mix with the faces of dead friends, where artillery shells fall like rain, and where you're always running through mud that gets deeper with every step. You wake up screaming sometimes, but so does everyone else, so nobody comments on it. Screaming in your sleep is just another symptom of trench life, like lice, or trench foot, or the persistent cough that won't go away. Your memory starts playing tricks on you. You can remember every detail of a German soldier's face as you bayoneted him 3 weeks ago, the color of his eyes, the way his mouth opened in surprise, the exact sound he made as he died. But you can't remember your sister's birthday, or what your mother's voice sounds like, or whether the girl you left behind was named Mary or Margaret. The important memories, the ones that connected you to your previous life, fade like old photographs. But the traumatic memories burn themselves into your brain with perfect clarity, available for instant replay whenever your mind decides you haven't suffered enough today. You develop rituals that help you feel like you have some control over the randomness of death. You always put on your left boot before your right boot. You touch the photograph in your breast pocket before every patrol. You count to 10 before looking over the parapet. These actions have no logical connection to survival, but they make you feel like you're doing something to influence your fate. Other soldiers have their own rituals, equally irrational and equally necessary. One man always loads his rifle with exactly 17 rounds, never 16 or 18. Another refuses to write letters home on Tuesdays. A third won't eat anything that's been opened with his bayonet. These superstitions multiply and become more elaborate as the weeks pass. You realize you're all going collectively insane in small methodical increments, but the alternative to madness is facing the full reality of your situation. And that way lies complete psychological breakdown. Your emotional range narrows to a few basic responses: fear, exhaustion, hunger, and a kind of numb acceptance that can pass for courage in dim light. More complex emotions, love, hope, ambition, curiosity, seem to belong to some previous version of yourself, who lived in a world where tomorrow was guaranteed, and death was a distant concept. You stop talking about home except in the most general terms. Detailed reminiscences about family, friends, and peacetime life become too painful because they remind you of everything you've lost and might never see again. Conversation becomes limited to immediate practical concerns: the weather, the food, enemy activity, rumors about when your unit might be rotated out of the line. The concept of the future shrinks to encompass only the next few hours. Long-term planning becomes impossible when you're not sure you'll live to see next week. You stop making plans beyond your next meal, your next sleep period, your next turn on sentry duty. This narrowing of temporal perspective is actually a survival mechanism. Men who continue thinking about long-term futures tend to break down faster than men who focus on immediate survival. Hope, it turns out, can be a dangerous luxury in an environment where hope is constantly being crushed by reality. Your relationship with death changes fundamentally. Death stops being an abstract concept and becomes a familiar presence, like an unwelcome relative who's moved in permanently and refuses to leave. You see so much death, in so many forms, that it loses its power to shock you. You step over corpses without breaking stride. You eat your dinner while sitting next to the body of a friend who was killed an hour ago. You discuss tactics while using a dead German as a sandbag replacement. Death becomes mundane, routine, just another aspect of daily life that requires practical management rather than emotional processing. This psychological numbing is necessary for functioning, but it comes with costs. When death becomes normal, life becomes less precious. Risk-taking behaviors increase, because the difference between living and dying seems less significant. Some soldiers start volunteering for dangerous missions, not because they're brave, but because they've lost the ability to care whether they survive. You begin to suspect that you're changing into something that won't be able to return to civilian life, even if the war ends and you survive. The person who left England months ago was capable of normal human relationships, normal emotions, normal reactions to normal situations. The person you're becoming is adapted for survival in an environment where normal human beings can't function. You're harder, colder, more capable of violence, and less capable of the kind of emotional connections that make civilian life meaningful. Sometimes, during quiet moments between bombardments, you catch glimpses of your old self trying to surface. You remember laughing at something that wasn't gallows humor. You remember caring about something that wasn't immediately related to not dying. You remember feeling something other than the basic emotions necessary for survival. But these glimpses become rarer and shorter as the weeks pass. Your old self is being methodically erased by experiences that no human mind was designed to process. You're becoming a different person, shaped by trauma, into something that can function in hell, but might not be able to function anywhere else. The most disturbing realization is that this psychological transformation might be irreversible. Even if you survive, even if you go home, even if you try to return to your old life, you'll be bringing this new version of yourself back with you, someone who's seen too much, done too much, and been changed too much, to ever really go back to being the person you were before. This is the hidden cost of trench warfare that nobody talks about in the recruitment posters or the patriotic speeches. They're not just asking for your time, your youth, or even your life. They're asking for your sanity, your humanity, and your ability to ever be truly happy again. And you're giving it to them, one traumatic day at a time, because the alternative is breaking down completely and being no use to anyone, including yourself. It starts with a sound you'll never forget. The distinctive pop and hiss of German gas canisters being opened across no man's land. At first, you think it might be steam from their field kitchens, or smoke from a small fire. Then the wind shifts, and you catch the first whiff of something that smells like swimming pools mixed with rotting fruit, and the promise of a very bad death. The gas alarm rings out across your section of the line, a frantic clanging of metal on metal that sends every man scrambling for his gas mask with movements so practiced they've become automatic. You've drilled this response hundreds of times, but drilling and reality are two very different experiences, especially when reality includes the knowledge that your gas mask might not work, and you might be about to die in one of the most horrible ways human ingenuity has devised. Your hands shake as you pull the rubber mask over your face, checking the seal around your eyes and mouth, while trying not to breathe too deeply. The mask is hot, claustrophobic, and makes everything sound muffled and distant. Your field of vision narrows to what you can see through two small glass windows that fog up with your panicked breathing. The gas itself rolls across no man's land like a yellow-green fog, hugging the ground and flowing into shell craters and trenches like deadly water seeking its level. It moves slowly, almost casually, giving you plenty of time to watch your own death approaching at walking speed. Chlorine gas was bad enough when it first appeared. It burns your lungs, dissolves your respiratory system from the inside out, and leaves you drowning in your own bodily fluids. But the Germans have been busy in their chemical laboratories, and they've developed new variants that make chlorine look like a mild irritant. Phosgene smells like freshly cut grass, which would be pleasant if it wasn't dissolving your lungs. It's colorless, nearly odorless, and by the time you realize you've been exposed, it's too late. Men who think they've survived a gas attack fine will drop dead hours later, as their lungs fill with fluid, and they drown on dry land. Mustard gas is the worst of all. It doesn't just attack your lungs, it attacks everything. Your skin, your eyes, your throat, your digestive system. It soaks through uniforms, seeps through poorly sealed gas masks, and causes chemical burns that refuse to heal. Men exposed to mustard gas don't just die, they dissolve slowly and agonizingly over days or weeks. Inside your gas mask, breathing becomes a conscious effort. The filter canister attached to the front of your mask is supposed to neutralize incoming gas, but you're never entirely sure it's working. Each breath could be your last, and you won't know until you start feeling the burning in your lungs that means the filter has failed. The worst part isn't the fear of dying, it's the fear of dying badly. You've seen men caught without their masks or with defective equipment. They claw at their throats, foam at the mouth, and convulse in ways that suggest their nervous systems are shutting down in no particular order. They don't die quickly or quietly, they die screaming, gasping, begging for help that can't come because anyone who tries to help them without proper protection will join them. You sit in your trench, breathing carefully through your mask, watching the gas clouds settle into the landscape around you like a malevolent spirit looking for victims. Birds fall dead from the sky, rats flee from their holes only to collapse after a few steps. Even insects seem to drop out of the air, poisoned by an atmosphere that has become fundamentally hostile to life. The gas hangs around longer than you expect. What goes up must come down, but what gets released at ground level just sits there pooling in low areas, and drifting slowly with whatever breeze happens to be moving. You can't remove your mask until the all-clear signal, and that might not come for hours. Hours in a gas mask feels like days. The rubber seals cut into your face, leaving permanent marks. Sweat accumulates inside the mask with no way to wipe it away. The filter makes breathing difficult, so you're constantly on the edge of feeling suffocated. Your peripheral vision disappears completely, so you can't see threats approaching from the sides. Communication becomes nearly impossible. You can't shout orders or warnings through the mask. Hand signals work only if everyone is looking in the right direction, which they usually aren't, because everyone is focused on their own survival. Units become collections of isolated individuals, each man alone with his fear and his malfunctioning equipment. Sometimes the gas attack is followed immediately by infantry assault. The Germans calculate that men in gas masks will be disoriented, partially blinded, and unable to coordinate effective resistance. They're usually right. Fighting while wearing a gas mask is like trying to box while wearing a blindfold and breathing through a straw. You try to aim your rifle through the small glass windows of your mask, but the windows fog up from your breath, and you can't clear them without breaking the seal that's keeping you alive. You fire at shapes moving through the gas, hoping you're shooting at Germans rather than your own men who are equally blinded and confused. The psychological effect of gas attacks extends far beyond the immediate casualties. Even when your gas mask works perfectly, even when you survive unharmed, the experience changes you. You develop a paranoid sensitivity to smells, constantly sniffing the air for traces of chemicals that might indicate another attack. You sleep with your gas mask within arm's reach, sometimes clutching it to your chest like a security blanket. You wake up gasping, convinced you smell gas when there's nothing there but the usual trench odors of mud, decay, and unwashed human bodies. Worse, you lose faith in your equipment. If your rifle jams, you can clear it, or use your bayonet. If your gas mask fails, you die horribly, and there's nothing you can do about it. This dependence on potentially unreliable technology adds another layer of anxiety to an already overwhelming situation. The long-term effects of gas exposure accumulate over time. Even small doses that don't kill you immediately cause permanent damage to your lungs, eyes, and nervous system. You develop a persistent cough that brings up blood and tissue. Your eyes water constantly and become sensitive to light. Your hands shake for no apparent reason. You realize that even if you survive the war, even if you make it home, you'll be carrying the effects of German chemistry with you for the rest of your life. Every breath will be a reminder of that yellow-green cloud rolling across no man's land, bringing death in a form so unnatural that it seems to violate some fundamental law of how human beings are supposed to die. But the worst part of gas warfare isn't what it does to your body, it's what it does to your faith in human nature. Using poison gas crosses a line that makes this war different from previous conflicts. This isn't just organized violence anymore. This is a deliberate attempt to make death as horrible as possible, to weaponize suffering itself. You start to understand that you're not fighting a conventional war anymore. You're participating in a contest to see which side can develop the most creative methods of inflicting agony on young men who in a saner world would be worrying about their jobs, their girlfriends, and what to have for dinner. And the most terrifying realization is that your own side is developing equally horrible weapons to use against the Germans. Somewhere behind the lines, British chemists are working just as hard to create new forms of death to send drifting across no man's land in the other direction. You're not just a victim of this chemical warfare, you're a participant in it, complicit in a form of combat that your grandfather would have considered dishonorable, and your children will hopefully never have to understand. The gas finally dissipates, the all clear sounds, and you remove your mask with hands that shake from more than just relief. You've survived another chemical attack, but you know there will be others, and each one will be a little worse than the last, as both sides escalate their efforts to out-horror each other. Welcome to the future of warfare, where death comes not just from bullets and bombs, but from the very air you breathe, poisoned by men in laboratories, who will never have to smell the results of their work or watch young soldiers die from their innovations. The whistle blows at dawn, and for a moment that lasts forever, you stare at the ladder leading up and out of your trench. This is it. This is the moment you've been dreading since you arrived at the front. The moment when you stop hiding in holes and start running directly toward people who are waiting to kill you. "Over the top, lads," shouts an officer, whose voice cracks with the strain of ordering men to their deaths. For king and country, the mathematics of what you're about to do are brutally simple. You and several thousand other British soldiers are going to climb out of your trenches and walk across roughly 100 yards of open ground toward German positions. The Germans have machine guns, artillery, barbed wire, and months to prepare their defenses. You have rifles, bayonets, and the slim hope that enough of you will survive the crossing to actually accomplish something. The odds are not in your favor. The plan, as explained by officers who will remain safely in the trenches while you die, is beautifully straightforward in its optimism. The week-long artillery bombardment has supposedly destroyed German wire, collapsed their trenches, and killed most of their defenders. All you have to do is walk across no man's land and occupy the empty German positions. This plan has two minor flaws. First, it assumes German defenses are actually destroyed, which they're not. Second, it assumes Germans are too stupid to rebuild their positions during a week-long bombardment that announced exactly when and where the attack would come. German defensive positions aren't just trenches, they're fortified systems designed by engineers who understand that British and French soldiers will eventually try to cross no man's land in large numbers. Machine gun nests are positioned to create overlapping fields of fire. Artillery positions are surveyed to drop shells on specific areas of no man's land. Every approach has been measured, ranged, and pre-targeted. The Germans have spent months preparing to kill you specifically, and they're very good at their job. You climb the ladder with legs that feel like they belong to someone else. Your rifle weighs approximately 400 pounds, or at least that's what it feels like, as you struggle to maneuver it while climbing out of the trench. Your pack, loaded with ammunition, rations, and equipment you'll probably never get to use, tries to pull you backward into the relative safety of the hole you're leaving. The landscape that greets you above ground looks like the surface of an alien planet. Shell craters filled with stagnant water stretch in every direction. Coils of barbed wire, some of it British, some German, most of it just twisted metal, that will catch your uniform and hold you in place while machine gunners take careful aim. The bodies of previous attacks are scattered across no man's land, like discarded mannequins. Some are British, some German, some so badly damaged that nationality becomes irrelevant. They've been there for weeks or months, slowly becoming part of the landscape, reminders of how previous attempts at crossing this particular piece of ground have ended. You're supposed to advance in waves, maintaining formation, moving at a steady walking pace to keep the line organized. This sounds reasonable in theory, but theory doesn't account for what happens when German machine guns open fire on closely packed groups of men moving predictably across open ground. The first wave goes over the top, and immediately starts taking casualties. Men fall within steps of leaving the trench, cut down by machine gun fire that has been waiting for this moment. Others make it further before disappearing into shell craters, or getting tangled in wire that's supposed to have been destroyed by artillery, but is very much intact, and very much capable of holding a man in place while he gets shot. The German machine guns have wonderful names: Spandau, Maxim, names that sound almost friendly until you hear them firing. Each gun can shoot about 600 rounds per minute, which means one machine gunner can kill more men in 10 minutes than a medieval army could kill in an entire battle. And there are lots of machine guns, more than British intelligence estimated, much more. The sound of machine gun fire is different when you're on the receiving end. Instead of the distant chatter you hear from the safety of the trenches, it's an immediate personal sound that means bullets are passing very close to parts of your body you'd prefer to keep intact. You run toward the German lines because moving forward is slightly less terrifying than staying in place or trying to retreat. Running makes you feel like you're doing something, even though you're actually just making yourself a faster moving target for people who have been practicing shooting at moving targets for months. The artillery bombardment, that was supposed to destroy German defenses, has turned no man's land into an obstacle course of shell craters, each one filled with water, mud, and things that used to be soldiers. You jump from crater to crater, using them as temporary cover, while bullets snap through the air above your head. In one crater, you land on top of a German soldier who's been dead long enough to have reached an advanced state of decomposition. In another, you find a wounded British soldier from an earlier attack, delirious with pain and infection, asking for water you don't have and help you can't provide. The barbed wire that artillery was supposed to destroy is not only intact, but has been reinforced and carefully arranged to funnel attacking infantry into predetermined killing zones. What looks like gaps in the wire are actually carefully planned traps that lead directly into the fields of fire of waiting machine guns. You get tangled in wire that grabs your uniform, your pack, your rifle, and your skin with equal enthusiasm. While you struggle to free yourself, German snipers have plenty of time to take careful aim. Wire cutters, if you have them and can reach them, seem to be designed for some other type of wire that exists only in the imagination of whoever designed them. Panic starts to set in as you realize the attack is failing. Men are falling faster than they can advance. The wounded are crying for help that can't come. Officers are shouting contradictory orders that nobody can hear over the noise of gunfire and explosions. Some men break and run back toward the British trenches. They're cut down by machine gun fire or killed by their own artillery, which continues to shell the German lines regardless of where British soldiers happen to be. Others curl up in shell craters and refuse to move, paralyzed by the realization that advancing means death and retreating means death and staying in place means death. A few men, either braver or more frightened than the rest, actually make it close enough to the German trenches to use their bayonets. These brief vicious fights are settled quickly and permanently, usually in favor of defenders who have better positions, more ammunition, and the advantage of not having just run 100 yards while being shot at. You realize you're probably going to die in the next few minutes, and there's nothing you can do about it, except keep moving forward, because that's what you've been trained to do. Individual survival becomes less important than following orders, partly because of military discipline, but mostly because thinking about survival in this situation leads to madness. The attack that was supposed to last a few hours and break through German lines completely peters out after about 20 minutes. The survivors crawl back to British trenches if they can, hide in shell craters if they can't, or lie where they fell if they're too badly wounded to move. You make it back to your trench with a bullet hole through your sleeve, and a bayonet cut on your shoulder that you don't remember getting. You're alive, which makes you luckier than about 60% of the men who went over the top with you this morning. The officers immediately start planning the next attack, scheduled for tomorrow morning, using the same tactics that failed so spectacularly today. They've learned nothing from the experience, except that next time they'll need more men, more artillery, and more optimism. You sit in your trench, cleaning mud and blood off your rifle, and realize that you've just participated in the most systematic method of killing young men that human beings have ever devised. The attack accomplished nothing except proving that machine guns are more effective than courage, that artillery preparation doesn't guarantee success, and that officers who plan attacks have a very different relationship with reality than soldiers who execute them. Tomorrow you'll do it again, because that's what soldiers do. You'll climb the ladder, cross no man's land, and run toward people who are trying to kill you, because the alternative is being court-martialed for cowardice and shot by your own side. This is what over the top really means. Not heroic charges and glorious victories, but mathematics that favor the defenders, tactics that haven't evolved beyond medieval thinking, and young men dying in vast numbers for gains measured in yards rather than miles. The whistle will blow again tomorrow morning, and you'll climb another ladder toward another set of machine guns manned by different Germans who are just as competent at killing British soldiers as the ones you failed to reach today. And you'll keep doing it until you're too dead to climb ladders, because in trench warfare, that's what victory looks like. Not winning, just lasting longer than the other side's ability to kill you. The bullet hits you just above the left knee, and for a moment you feel nothing except surprise. Bullets in adventure stories cause immediate dramatic pain that lets heroes know they've been shot. Real bullets, it turns out, are more subtle. The impact feels like being punched by someone with brass knuckles, followed by a strange numbness that spreads down your leg. Then the real pain arrives, and you understand why wounded soldiers scream. You're lying in a shell crater about halfway between the British and German trenches, which means you're in no man's land during daylight hours when anyone who tries to rescue you will be shot by snipers from both sides. The Red Cross is supposed to protect medical personnel, but sniper bullets don't read Geneva Convention markings, and dead medics can't help wounded soldiers, so you wait, and bleed, and try not to think about how long you might be waiting. The wound itself is interesting from a medical perspective, if you can maintain enough detachment to study your own injury. The bullet has shattered your femur and torn through several major blood vessels, creating a hole that leaks blood at a rate that suggests you have a limited amount of time to receive medical attention. You try to apply pressure to the wound using field dressings from your pack, but your hands are shaking from shock and blood loss, and the dressings aren't really designed for holes this size. Military first aid training focused on minor cuts and bruises, not catastrophic injuries that require surgery you're not going to get. The pain comes in waves, starting as a dull ache and building to levels that make you understand why some wounded soldiers beg to be put out of their misery. Between waves you feel almost normal, which creates a false hope that maybe the injury isn't as serious as it looks. Then another wave hits, and you remember that you're probably going to die in this shell crater. Other wounded soldiers share your crater, casualties from previous attacks who were never recovered. Some are unconscious, some are delirious, and some are lucid enough to offer advice about managing pain and blood loss that would be helpful if you had morphine, proper bandages, or any realistic hope of medical evacuation. One soldier has been here for 3 days with a stomach wound that's clearly infected. He's developed gangrene, and the smell of his rotting flesh mixes with the general odor of no man's land to create an atmosphere that would be nauseating if you weren't already sick from blood loss and shock. Another man has lost both legs to a shell explosion, but remains conscious and chatty, discussing his injury with the detached interest of someone observing someone else's medical emergency. He's already accepted that he's going to die, and seems more concerned with making conversation than with his missing extremities. Funny thing about legs, he says conversationally, as if discussing the weather, you don't really miss them until you try to walk somewhere. Then you notice they're gone. The worst cases are the head wounds. Men with pieces of skull missing, brain tissue exposed, functioning at levels that suggest significant neurological damage. They talk to people who aren't there, relive battles from months ago, and occasionally become violent without warning. Being trapped in a crater with someone whose brain has been damaged by shrapnel adds psychological stress to your existing medical emergency. You try to stay conscious because unconscious wounded soldiers often die from blood loss, exposure, or choking on their own vomit. But staying conscious means experiencing every moment of pain, fear, and growing weakness as your body slowly shuts down from blood loss. Time becomes distorted. Minutes feel like hours, hours disappear without notice. You drift in and out of consciousness, waking up each time slightly weaker and more disoriented. Your mouth is so dry you can't swallow, but drinking water from shell craters means consuming a mixture of rainwater, chemicals from gas attacks, and liquids that have leached from decomposing bodies. You drink it anyway, because thirst is more immediate than the fear of poisoning. Night falls, and stretcher bearers begin the dangerous work of retrieving wounded from no man's land. These men are either incredibly brave or completely insane, crawling through mud and darkness to reach casualties while both sides continue firing at anything that moves. You hear voices calling softly in the darkness. Anyone alive out here? It's the most beautiful sound you've ever heard, even though you know that many wounded soldiers never get found, and some die just as rescuers reach them. A stretcher bearer finds your crater and begins the process of triage, quickly determining which wounded men can be saved, which are beyond help, and which ones get priority for evacuation. This process is necessarily brutal and impersonal. Men who are clearly dying don't get evacuated because stretchers are limited and other soldiers have better chances of survival. You're conscious, coherent, and have a survivable wound if treated quickly. You get tagged for evacuation, which means 4 men will risk their lives carrying you across no man's land to British trenches, then to a dressing station, then hopefully to a proper hospital where surgeons might be able to save your leg. The journey on a stretcher through no man's land is a nightmare of pain amplified by movement. Every step the stretcher bearers take sends shockwaves through your shattered leg. They move as quickly as possible while staying low enough to avoid sniper fire, which means a bumpy, jarring ride that turns your broken bone into a grinding collection of fragments. Sniper bullets occasionally snap overhead, reminding everyone that this rescue mission is taking place in an active combat zone where medical personnel are legitimate targets. Your stretcher bearers are volunteers who could be safely in the trenches but chose instead to risk their lives for wounded men they've never met. You reach the British trenches and immediately notice that wounded soldiers are not a high priority for anyone except medical personnel. Space is limited, resources are scarce, and healthy soldiers have jobs to do that don't include caring for casualties who might die anyway. The regimental aid post is a hole in the ground with a canvas roof, presided over by a medical officer who's been working without sleep for 36 hours straight. He examines your wound with efficient brutality, determines that you need surgery he can't provide, and marks you for evacuation to a casualty clearing station several miles behind the lines. More stretcher bearers, another journey, this time in an ambulance that was designed to carry supplies rather than wounded men. You're loaded into the back with 5 other casualties, all of you bleeding on each other while the ambulance bounces along roads that are under occasional artillery fire. The casualty clearing station is a tent hospital where military surgeons attempt to perform complex operations under field conditions with limited supplies and no time for niceties like proper anesthesia or sterile technique. Your surgeon is a civilian doctor who's been drafted into military service and is probably having the worst professional experience of his career. He amputates your leg just below the knee, explaining in a matter-of-fact voice that the bone damage is too extensive to repair and infection has already set in. The amputation takes about 20 minutes and is performed with you conscious but sedated, which means you're aware of what's happening, but detached from the physical sensations. You wake up missing a limb you've had your entire life. The phantom pain is immediate and severe. Your brain continues to receive signals from nerves that are no longer connected to anything. You feel burning, crushing, stabbing sensations in a foot that no longer exists. The nursing care is provided by overworked medical personnel who are dealing with hundreds of similar cases. Your stump is bandaged, and you're given basic instructions for managing an amputation, but detailed rehabilitation will have to wait until you're evacuated to a hospital in England, if you survive that long. Many wounded soldiers die from infections that develop after surgery. Others succumb to shock, blood loss, or complications from anesthesia. The survival rate for serious wounds is improving, but improving still means that a significant percentage of wounded soldiers die despite receiving medical care. You're one of the lucky ones, alive, conscious, and stable enough for further evacuation. But you're also facing a future as a disabled veteran in a society that has no systems for supporting men who've lost limbs in service to their country. The army will discharge you as soon as you're medically stable, with a small pension that might cover basic living expenses if you're careful with money. Finding employment as an amputee will be difficult. Explaining your injury to people who have no conception of trench warfare will be impossible. You'll spend the rest of your life dealing with phantom pain, mobility limitations, and memories of lying in a shell crater watching your own blood seep into French soil. The physical wound will heal, eventually. The psychological wounds will follow you home and affect every relationship, every job, every quiet moment for decades. This is what wounded in action really means, not heroic injuries that heal cleanly and leave interesting scars to impress girls at dances. It means permanent disability, chronic pain, and a lifetime of adjusting to capabilities you'll never have again. But you're alive, which makes you luckier than the men who are still lying in shell craters, waiting for rescue that will never come, or already buried in mass graves behind the lines with simple wooden markers that say unknown British soldier. You survived the trenches, the attack, the wounding, and the medical system. Now you have to survive going home as a different person than the one who left, to a world that doesn't understand what you've experienced and isn't equipped to help you recover from experiences that can't really be recovered from. The war will end eventually, but for wounded veterans the war never really ends. It just changes location and tactics. By 1917, you've been in the trenches for over a year, and you're beginning to understand that this war isn't going to end anytime soon. The grand strategies that were supposed to break the deadlock have failed. The new weapons that promised decisive victory have only made killing more efficient without making victory more likely. The war has settled into a routine of industrial-scale slaughter that could continue indefinitely. You're no longer the eager young recruit who arrived in France full of patriotic enthusiasm and naive expectations. You're something different now. A veteran, a survivor, a killing machine that occasionally remembers being human. The war has shaped you into exactly the kind of soldier it needs. Someone who can function in an environment that would have driven your civilian self insane within days. The trenches have become a permanent city of mud and death, complete with their own infrastructure, culture, and social systems. Supply lines stretch back for miles, bringing forward everything needed to keep hundreds of thousands of men alive in holes in the ground. Communication networks connect frontline trenches to headquarters dozens of miles behind the lines. Engineering units constantly expand and improve the defensive systems that have become your permanent home. You know the trench system better than you knew your own hometown. Every traverse, every dugout, every machine gun position has become as familiar as the rooms of your childhood home. You can navigate the maze of trenches in complete darkness, following duckboards and communication trenches that lead to positions with names like Hellfire Corner, Dead Man's Alley, and Suicide Trench. The names aren't chosen for dramatic effect. They're accurate descriptions of places where men die regularly and in large numbers. The routine of trench life has become second nature. Stand to at dawn, weapons maintenance, trench repair, sentry duty, stand to at dusk, night patrols, and fitful sleep interrupted by artillery barrages and the screams of wounded men. Day after day, month after month, with no end in sight, and no clear indication that all this suffering is accomplishing anything meaningful. You've developed the skills that civilian life never taught you. You can sleep standing up in mud while artillery shells explode nearby. You can identify different types of incoming shells by sound and take appropriate action before they hit. You can kill a man with a bayonet, a rifle, or your bare hands with the same efficiency that you once used for farm work or factory labor. More importantly, you've learned to manage the psychological toll of constant exposure to death and violence. You've compartmentalized your mind into sections that handle different aspects of survival: tactical awareness, emotional numbness, memory suppression, and a thin veneer of sanity that helps you interact with other soldiers without appearing completely mad. The men around you have all undergone similar transformations. Veterans are easy to identify. They move differently, speak in abbreviated sentences, and have eyes that seem to be looking at something just over your shoulder, something that happened months ago in a different trench but never really went away. New recruits still arrive regularly, fresh from England with clean uniforms and intact optimism. They're easy targets for German snipers because they haven't learned to keep their heads down, and they're psychological hazards for veterans because they remind everyone of what they used to be like before the war changed them. You watch new recruits go through the same transformation you experienced, from eager patriotism to grim determination to hollow-eyed survival. It takes about 3 months to complete the process, assuming they live that long. Those who adapt become veterans. Those who don't become casualties or psychiatric cases evacuated to hospitals behind the lines. The casualty rates have reached levels that would have been inconceivable at the beginning of the war. Entire battalions are wiped out in single attacks and replaced with new battalions that suffer similar fates within weeks. The British Army has essentially become a machine for processing young men into casualties, with new recruits feeding in one end and corpses coming out the other. But somehow, the war continues. New men arrive to replace the dead. New supplies arrive to replace expended ammunition. New orders arrive from headquarters, calling for new attacks that will accomplish the same nothing that previous attacks accomplished, but with slightly different tactics that will fail for slightly different reasons. You begin to suspect that the war has achieved a kind of equilibrium, a balance point where both sides can continue killing each other indefinitely, without either side gaining a decisive advantage. The Germans can't break through British lines, but British forces can't break through German positions either. Both sides are locked in a deadly embrace that neither can escape. The home front seems increasingly disconnected from the reality of trench warfare. Letters from family describe a civilian world that continues functioning normally, while hundreds of thousands of men destroy each other in France. Your mother writes about church services and village gossip. Your girlfriend sends photographs and pressed flowers that seem to come from an entirely different universe. You try to write letters that explain what you're experiencing, but the words don't exist. How do you describe the smell of a 3-day-old corpse to someone whose biggest worry is whether it might rain on the church picnic? How do you explain the sound of a man choking on poison gas to people who think the war is a glorious adventure that will end with a victory parade? So you write about safe topics, the weather, your health, requests for packages of food or cigarettes. You don't mention the German soldier you bayoneted last week, or the nightmare that wakes you up screaming every night. You don't describe the way your best friend's head disappeared in a cloud of red mist when a sniper found his range. The propaganda posters at home still show clean uniformed soldiers in heroic poses, but the reality is very different. You're filthy, diseased, mentally damaged, and so far removed from civilian life that you're not sure you'll ever be able to return to it. The war has made you into something that can survive in hell but might not be able to function in normal human society. Technology continues to evolve, but it only makes killing more efficient rather than making victory more likely. Poison gas becomes more sophisticated. Artillery becomes more accurate. Machine guns become more reliable. Aircraft begin dropping bombs and engaging in aerial combat that adds a new dimension to the slaughter. But none of these innovations break the fundamental deadlock. They just create new ways to kill people who are trapped in the same impossible situation you're trapped in, stuck between machine gun nests and barbed wire, following orders from officers who don't understand the tactical situation, fighting for objectives that make sense to someone, but not to the soldiers who have to die capturing them. The worst part is that you're getting used to it. The horror that would have driven you insane a year ago has become routine. You eat your dinner while sitting next to corpses. You sleep in dugouts carved from soil mixed with human remains. You plan tomorrow's patrol while cleaning today's blood off your bayonet. This adaptation is necessary for survival, but it comes with costs that won't be calculated until the war ends and veterans try to return to civilian life. You're being shaped by experiences that have no civilian equivalent, developing skills that have no peacetime application, and accumulating psychological damage that has no known cure. The war has become your life, your reality, your entire world. Everything before the trenches seems like it happened to someone else. Everything after the war seems impossible to imagine. You exist in a permanent present tense of mud, fear, routine and sudden death. And somewhere in headquarters far behind the lines, officers are planning the next big offensive that will finally break the deadlock and end the war. It will fail, just like all the previous offensives, and thousands more men will die for gains measured in yards rather than miles. But you'll participate anyway, because that's what soldiers do. You'll climb out of your trench, cross no man's land, and attack German positions that are just as well defended as they were last time. Some of you will survive, most won't, and the ones who do survive will return to the same trenches to wait for the next pointless attack. This is what the long stalemate really means. Not just military deadlock, but the systematic destruction of an entire generation of European men in a war that nobody knows how to end, and nobody wants to lose. By 1918, something has changed. You can feel it in the way orders are delivered, see it in the faces of officers who've spent years perfecting the art of sending men to die for meaningless objectives. There's a new urgency, a sense that this war is finally approaching some kind of resolution, though whether that resolution will favor the British Empire or the German Reich remains an open question. The Americans have arrived, bringing with them fresh troops, industrial capacity, and an optimism that strikes seasoned veterans as either inspiring or completely insane. American soldiers haven't yet learned that courage is no substitute for machine guns, that enthusiasm doesn't stop poison gas, and that individual heroism is largely irrelevant in industrial warfare. They still believe in clean victories and honorable combat. You watch them with the mixture of envy and pity that all veterans feel toward new arrivals. They remind you of what you used to be like before the trenches taught you that survival requires abandoning most of what you once thought about warfare, honor, and human nature. The German spring offensive has failed, but just barely. For months it seemed like the Germans might actually break through and end the war on their terms. Their stormtroopers used new tactics, infiltration, bypassing strong points, creating chaos behind the lines, that came closer to success than anything anyone had attempted since 1914. But close isn't victory in trench warfare. The German offensive ground to a halt for the same reasons that British and French offensives had failed: logistics, reserves, and the fundamental mathematics of attacking prepared positions with weapons that favor defenders. Now it's your turn. The 100 Days Offensive, though nobody calls it that yet, represents everything the British and French have learned about breaking trench warfare. Combined arms tactics, rolling barrages, tank support, aircraft coordination, and massive concentrations of artillery that make previous bombardments look like practice sessions. The difference is that this time it might actually work. You're part of an attack force that includes more firepower than entire armies possessed at the beginning of the war. Tanks, real tanks, not the mechanical disasters that barely functioned in earlier battles, are going to lead the assault. Aircraft will provide close support, attacking German positions while you advance. Artillery will create a moving wall of explosions that stays ahead of your advance, suppressing German defenders without giving them time to recover. In theory, it's brilliant. In practice, you're still going to be running across open ground toward people who want to kill you. The preparatory bombardment begins at dawn and continues for hours. The intensity is beyond anything you've experienced, even after years of artillery barrages. The sound is so loud it becomes physical, pressing against your body like a giant hand. The ground shakes continuously, and you worry that the trenches might collapse from the vibrations, but this bombardment is different from previous ones. Instead of trying to destroy everything in the target area, it's carefully planned to suppress specific positions while leaving routes of advance relatively intact. The artillery is talking to the infantry, coordinating fires with ground movements in ways that were impossible earlier in the war. When the barrage lifts and moves forward, you go over the top into a landscape that looks like the surface of the moon after a meteorite bombardment. But the German wire has actually been cut this time, and the machine gun positions have actually been suppressed, and for the first time in your military career, an attack is proceeding according to plan. The tanks lumber forward like iron beasts, crossing trenches and crushing wire while machine gun bullets bounce off their armor. German defenders who survived the bombardment focus their fire on these mechanical monsters, giving infantry precious seconds to advance without being targeted. You follow behind a tank, using its bulk as mobile cover while advancing toward German positions that are responding with less fire than you expected. Some machine gun nests have been destroyed, others are temporarily suppressed by artillery. A few are firing, but their fields of fire are disrupted by smoke and the chaos of a coordinated assault. For the first time since 1914, attacking forces are actually gaining ground measured in miles rather than yards. German positions that have been impregnable for years are falling to tactics that combine every lesson learned from 3.5 years of failure. But success in trench warfare comes with its own problems. As you advance beyond the German front lines, you enter territory that hasn't been fought over before. The landscape is relatively intact, which means German defenders have better positions to fall back to. Supply lines become stretched as you move further from your starting positions. Most importantly, you're now fighting Germans who aren't trapped in trenches. Mobile warfare requires different skills than trench fighting, and it turns out that after years of static positions, both sides have forgotten how to fight battles that involve movement, maneuver, and rapid tactical decisions. The Germans are retreating, but it's an organized retreat. They're falling back to prepared positions, destroying infrastructure as they go, and making you pay for every mile with casualties that mount steadily as the advance continues. Victory is possible now, but it's still expensive. You realize that winning the war might be almost as difficult as fighting it. Each day brings new villages to capture, new German positions to assault, new casualties to replace. The mathematics of attrition still apply, even when you're winning. The psychological impact of actually advancing is complex. After years of stalemate, success feels unreal. You keep expecting the attack to stall, the Germans to counterattack, the whole offensive to collapse into another bloody failure. But the advance continues, day after day, mile after mile. German resistance is crumbling, but slowly and at great cost. You're fighting an enemy that knows they're losing but continues fighting with the desperation of men who understand that defeat means their country will face consequences they can't imagine. And then, suddenly, it's over. November 11th, 1918, 11 a.m. The guns stop firing. The silence is so complete, so sudden, that it feels like a physical presence. For over 4 years, the Western Front has been defined by constant noise, artillery barrages, machine gun fire, exploding shells, screaming men. Now, for the first time since you arrived in France, you can hear birds singing. You stand in a trench that you may never have to defend again, holding a rifle that you may never have to fire at another human being, and try to process the fact that the war is over. The armistice has been signed, the killing has stopped. Germany has agreed to terms that amount to surrender in everything but name. But victory doesn't feel like what you expected. You're alive, which makes you one of the lucky ones, but you're not the same person who left England years ago, full of patriotic enthusiasm. The war has changed you in ways that will take decades to understand, and may never fully heal. The cost has been unprecedented in human history. Nearly 10 million soldiers dead, millions more wounded, entire regions of Europe devastated, empires collapsed, and social orders destroyed. The British Empire alone lost nearly 1 million men, most of them young soldiers who died in attacks that gained nothing except the knowledge of how not to attack the next time. You think about the friends who didn't survive to see this moment. The boy from Yorkshire, who died in your arms during a gas attack. The London clerk, who stepped on a mine during a night patrol. The Welsh miner, who was vaporized by a direct artillery hit. They're buried in cemeteries scattered across France and Belgium, or they're still lying in shell craters where they fell, or they're completely missing because high explosive shells don't leave much to bury. The war that was supposed to end all wars has instead demonstrated that human beings can organize industrial-scale slaughter with terrifying efficiency. The weapons, tactics, and strategies developed during 4 years of trench warfare have created a blueprint for future conflicts that will be even more destructive. You survived the trenches, the gas attacks, the artillery barrages, and the final offensive. But survival comes with costs that aren't immediately apparent. You have skills that are useless in civilian life. You can kill efficiently, sleep in impossible conditions, and function under stress that would break most people. But you can't relate to people who haven't shared your experiences, and you can't forget things that civilian minds aren't equipped to process. The journey home will be strange. England will look the same, but you'll see it through eyes that have witnessed the absolute worst of human behavior. Your family will welcome you as a hero, but they won't understand why you wake up screaming, or why loud noises make you reach for weapons that aren't there. Some veterans will adapt successfully to civilian life. Others will struggle with what future generations will learn to call post-traumatic stress disorder, though in 1918, it's just called shell shock, and isn't well understood by anyone. Many will turn to alcohol, violence or suicide as ways of managing psychological wounds that have no visible scars. The war is over, but its effects will continue for generations. The political map of Europe has been redrawn. 4 empires have collapsed. New nations have been created from the wreckage of old ones. The economic system that funded 4 years of industrial warfare has left most countries bankrupt and in debt. Most ominously, the peace treaty being negotiated will create conditions that make future wars almost inevitable. Germany will be humiliated, impoverished, and resentful. The victorious allies will be unable to agree on how to manage their victory. The weapons and tactics that made this war so destructive will be refined and improved by military planners who are already thinking about the next conflict. But for now, in this moment, the guns are silent. Young men are not dying in trenches. The systematic slaughter that defined the Western Front has finally ended. You've survived the most destructive war in human history, and you're going home to a world that will never be the same. The Great War is over. The world it created is just beginning. In the sudden quiet of no man's land, where poppies will soon grow over unmarked graves, you finally understand what you've been part of. Not a glorious adventure or a noble crusade, but a catastrophe that consumed a generation of European men and taught the world new ways to organize death on an industrial scale. You survived. Millions didn't. And the silence that has finally fallen over the trenches carries within it the echoes of every scream, every explosion, every last word spoken by dying soldiers who believed they were fighting for something that mattered. The war to end all wars is over. The long peace that everyone hoped would follow is already showing signs of strain. But for veterans of the trenches, the war will never really end. It will just change location, from the battlefields of France to the memories, nightmares, and damaged minds of the men who survived to tell its story. Welcome home, soldier. Try to forget what you've seen. Try to become human again. Try to live with what you've done and what you've witnessed. Try to explain the unexplainable to people who will never understand. The trenches are behind you now. The rest of your life stretches ahead, marked forever by those years when hell came to earth and you somehow survived it.